Okay, well, hopefully the audio is a little bit better than the last time I did it from the office. I got an independent microphone because when I played played the video back, the audio at home was actually better than what's here in the office. So I've got a new microphone, so hopefully that'll help, and I guess we'll find out shortly. I did a little test on it earlier, and it seems it's a little bit more shrill, a little less bassy, but hopefully it's understandable. So I want to continue with Hodgetts a little bit, so I'm going to share screen and pull up Hodgetts a bit. And let me just put this up out of the way a little bit and talk a little bit about, and a lot of this is in your reading, so I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time with this. But again, some differences in leadership, different leadership methods, leadership styles to be sure. And, there's a big divide in the area of two, what I would consider to be somewhat expertly, very important leadership methods. One is transformational and the other is transactional. And oftentimes, in my experience, certainly leaders of all walks, those that are a bit more charismatic than others, those that are a little more theory why than others, and so forth, the things you've been reading about. Oftentimes, it's a very transactional process. So to mean what? Well, to mean that if, for example, there are issues pending and there's a tremendous amount of pressure, well, the, in quotes, leader may be a little bit more, sometimes the expression we use is, boy, what a hard ass, boy, what's across his, back today, and so forth. Why is she being such a, what today and everything, and this indicates a very transactional process. You've heard the expression, and this was big in the military, that poop rolls downhill. So if things are bad up at the top, that's going to make its way all the way down. And in a what I would, and I don't like normatizing good, bad, right, or wrong, but I'm going to take the easy way out. I'm not going to allow you to do this, but I'm going to take the easy way out here and say, in a good leadership environment, that doesn't happen. In other words, if there's pressure at the top, the pressure stays at the top, and we don't pass it down to everybody in the chain. And that's a hard thing to do because that prevents or makes it at least appear less transactional. So, for example, in a very harsh environment, well, transactional leadership is based on the environment, personalities, and the interactions, the injected pressures, and things like that. Transformational leadership is something different. This is what Paul Hersey speaks about and others, but the Hersey-Blanchard book is very good in this area. And I used to sit because when I was doing my doctoral studies, just like Hodgetts was one of my professors, Paul Hersey was as well. And I used to sit with him in this little, Hofbrau, not all that far from the university. And we'd chat a little bit about this whole idea of leader-follower. And, there are matrix or matrices that, are broken down into quadrants. And they're, okay, so you have a horizontal axis, you have a vertical axis. But there were four follower styles in particular that Paul Hersey spoke of. And I think I mentioned this in one of the earlier video clips. And it's the idea that there are those that are willing and able. In other words, able to mean they know the job, et cetera, and they're willing to do that. They come in ready to work and mission focused and all of this. Then you have the extreme opposite, which is unwilling and unable. Well, so they lack the ability to do the job and they have a really crappy attitude. They're not terribly interested in doing the job. Well, I don't know why somebody like that was hired to begin with. Usually it's to fulfill some type of, let's just call it other need. Let's not pull the pin on any grenades here, but that's how a lot of that stuff happens. So when you see a video clip on YouTube of somebody working at the VA, the Veterans Administration, that lays out, I mean, punches out a 70 plus, almost 80-year-old veteran because this individual was having a bad, and you say, well, how does somebody get a job like that? Well, that's how somebody gets a job like that. It wasn't because they have the capacity to do it, and it wasn't because they have such a dynamic, attitude and approach to life and philosophy and all these things. It's something other. So the point being that those are the two extremes. So what's in between that? Well, what's in between that is able but unwilling. In other words, somebody that knows the job, can do the job. And how do we find that individual? Well, that's the one that sits back and says, you know what, I don't get paid enough for this. Or, hey, it's the end of the day, somebody else going to have to deal with this. Or it's not my job. Or that is the individual that you fire immediately. No ifs, ands, or buts. That person is history. Because that individual, it's like the rotten apple in a barrel, will infect the entire barrel. And then the one that you most often seek is somebody that's willing but unable. In other words, somebody that doesn't quite know the job. And you know what? That's a bit okay, because we're going to train them anyway. Yeah, they got this great MBA from New Jersey City University, but we need them to know what we specifically want them to know, what the job is from our end, what our philosophy is, what our culture, you get the idea. They don't know the job, but they're willing. They're willing. They'll do anything, almost anything. These are the individuals that will, walk on broken glass for you. That person is the individual you most want. So in a transformational environment, these things become very important. Now, there is the relationship between leader-follower, which Paul Hersey speaks about, and that's also in some of the books and the readings that we have. So I'm not going to give you the cliff notes on it here. I expect you to be doing some of the reading. But these are important, miles apart, but two very important methodologies: transactional, transformational. Arguably, transformational is the more enlightened approach. Arguably, transactional is very focused, and we'll speak about that a little bit. And then there is this charismatic leadership. So let's talk a little bit about this. So the slide here indicates transformational leaders are characterized by four interrelated elements. One is this idea: transformational leaders are a source of charisma and enjoy the admiration of their followers. Well, what would make you admire a leader? Well, somebody that treats you, in quotes, fairly, whatever that means, because that's certainly very abstract. Somebody that is interested in you personally, somebody that is interested in your growth, somebody that is interested in helping you with your life, your career, moving forward. These are the kinds of things that might make you admire someone. Somebody that leads by example. The idea, well, don't do what I do, do what I tell you to do. Well, so somebody that leads by example. In that movie, We Were Soldiers Once, Mel Gibson, in his role, and this goes back to Vietnam, so I'm familiar with it. You've only perhaps read about it in history books, but it was around the 1965 time frame, and it was one of the first major encounters of the, in quotes, Vietnam War, and it surrounded a whole bunch of stuff that happened in the Ia Drang Valley. And one of the things that in his role, and if you get to watch the movie, it's a great movie, but in his role as this particular colonel, and I'm not going to bore you with the names and details, but But in his role, one of the things he says is, I will be the first person on the field of battle, and I will be the last one to leave. In other words, it's not, hey, look, all you guys go out there and get shot. I'll be back here. Let me know if you need me. I mean, he was the first one out of that chopper. Last one to leave. Well, that's somebody that, in the context of what was going on then, I could certainly admire and find admiration for. I met the individual once. We'll talk about that another time. They enjoy pride, these transformational leaders, loyalty, and the confidence in their people, and align these followers by providing a common purpose or vision that, let's just put it frankly, everyone is willing to accept. And that's really what leadership is about. It's about really clearly articulating this vision of what we're trying to do here, what we want to be, what we want to become, an idea on how we're going to get there, and getting the buy-in and the support of everybody around us. And we don't do that by being very theory X. You're going to do it this way and you're going to like it. Wow. I mean, look, you're the boss. So, I know how to salute and say yes or no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. But as far as like it and really buy into this and feel a sense of ownership, I'm not certain about that. Then there's the idea of this inspirational thing. These leaders are extremely effective in articulating their vision, the mission, the belief structure, all this. Now, if it didn't make sense to you before, you understand without any buildup. Tell a story. Tell me a story. And if this were in class, each of you would have stood up with no notice, and I would have said to you, look, you got 3 minutes. Tell me a story. What are you going to tell me about? I've had people tell me about tough things in their marriage. I've had people tell me about death in the family. I've had people tell me about their grandfather who was a World War II hero, and so on and so forth. The point being, whatever occurred to them that they know very well, and that they just get up and they don't have to prepare. They don't have to read or take notes or something. They just articulate what was going on. Here's what happened. Here's what happened with my daughter. Here's what my grandfather did. Here's what I did on Sunday after church. Here's what ... And that ability is hugely important in leadership. So leaders are extremely effective in articulating their vision. If you have the skill to, in a very impromptu fashion, tell a story, then you have one of the requisite skills for leadership. Remember, we started this and I provoked you, and I'm sure by now you must realize that I'm poking at you and provoking you. Although there is some truth to it, not everyone can be an effective leader. Now, as to the argument among academics, leaders are born, leaders are made. Well, we'll talk about that at the end of the course, but I hope you're starting to shape a perspective and view on that. But let's not be naive either. Somebody that cannot communicate effectively, that cannot get up and tell a story, well, really probably cannot effectively articulate the mission and vision and goals and, blah, 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 all this stuff. So this idea of, and the text here, Hodgetts talks about this inspirational motivation and stuff. This becomes very important stuff. Intellectual stimulation, transformational leaders are able to get their followers to question old paradigms and to accept new views of the world regarding how things now need to be done. Old paradigms, well, we do it this way because we've always done it this way, because years ago it was done this way, because our grandfathers did it this way, because in the history books it says it was done. Okay, all right, okay. Get me the migraine stuff, because you got me, all right? So in other words, do we just naively and stupidly question everything. Well, that was kind of my generation, the 60s, the baby boomer generation. We kind of just, we lost faith and trust in government leaders, in senators, in congressmen, men generically, of course, in the president, in the vice president. And so we began to question everything and, somewhat importantly, doubt everything. Well, there is a wisdom to it, and there's certainly a huge naivete to that, because not everything is, again, normatizing, but not everything is bad, not everything is broken. That's where our worldview comes in, but we'll talk more about that. So, transformational leaders question old paradigm and accept new views of the world. Well, the world's not what it was. I mean, frankly, all right, now this is pulling the pin on a grenade, but this is a pin that I think needs to be pulled. Stereotyping, which is not a wise thing to do, but stereotyping, in quotes, the Chinese. Every single one? No, of course not. Don't be ridiculous. But we speak in the news at night in generalizations. Well, the Chinese, or President Xi and the Chinese government, okay, all right. So using some of those generalizations. They're learning STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. And what are we doing? We're wallowing. Not that there's no value in it, but to abdicate one for the other is an absurdity on its face. We're wallowing in social nonsense. Laughing stock of the world. So when we look at new views of the world, like it or not, involve data, involve analysis, involve science, it's less, and we've learned in this culture that it's most important how we feel about things. How does this, pet a bunny rabbit? And if that sounds cruel, tough. Science, technology, that's the environment. Why? Because we live in a high-tech world. And somebody is going to eat somebody else's lunch because they've got the skill set and they're good at something that we're not. So, leaders have to tell the truth. Leaders can't always blow warm smoke, up your armpit, and tell you what you want to hear. Leaders will also tell you what you need to hear. That's hard because we don't like that. We like being told yes. We don't like being told no. We like being told we're brilliant. We don't like being told you're deficient against other major groups on the planet. And you get the idea. So this idea of kicking out old paradigms and looking at new views, it's important. It's important. And leaders need to be able to navigate that, to be able to trade that information. It's not always easily done. Sometimes it's not done at all. Amazingly, I have found in a lot of experience and a lot of years, those that have the most to say oftentimes know the least. And there is great truth, and David Dunning is a hugely famous author and professor, and something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which perhaps we'll talk about, we may not get to it, but adds credence and support to the notion of you don't know what you don't know. Scratch our heads on what the hell is that supposed to mean? Well, that's the other side of it. The very skill or skill set that we would need to understand that and to recognize that we don't know what we don't know is deficient. So it's questionable that without outside intervention, we can even, in quotes, fix the problem. All right, moving on. So individualized consideration leaders are able to diagnose and elevate the needs of each of their followers through individual. In other words, we're not all the same. We don't all act the same, believe the same things, and that's okay. You know, my view, and I've articulated this to this group and to my other previous classes and students. Look, you believe whatever you got to believe, whatever helps you sleep nights, whether it's brilliance or whether it's ignorance, whatever helps you sleep nights. I'm not here to argue with you, fight with you. I'm here to present some ideas. You want to accept them, accept them. You want to reject it and continue on down the road the way you have been, that's up to you. I'm not offended. It's not personal. So the idea that individualized consideration becomes important, well, it is, because we're not all the same and we don't all believe the same things. And that's okay. I'm not telling you what to think, but I'm very much encouraging you to review how you think. How do you back up your arguments? What's it based on? Well, I saw it on the news. You saw it on the news. Doesn't matter to me what channel you watch. Do you, in your heart of hearts, really believe that to be an unbiased, credible source? I'll only say, if you do, Pax Vobiscum, I'm very sorry for you. That's the difficulty today. Where do we go? I don't allow my students to use Investopedia, all these other, pedias and stuff. Why? Because you can put and post anything you'd like up there. Well, I watched this video on YouTube, and so it must be so. Really? As grad students, I hope sincerely that we do the digging and find credible sources to rely on, because remember what the gold standard is, and it's very much akin to the scientific method. Gold standard is somewhat peer review. So, and by peer review, I don't mean you and me and the person next to us and all of this. Experts in the field, those with 100 years of experience, terminally degreed in whatever narrow little niche field we happen to be dealing with. Peer review. So we take an awful lot from, Porter, Michael Porter to be one. Michael Porter is very well published in Harvard Business Review. I hope you're not surprised to find that Harvard Business Review is not a peer-reviewed journal. So lots of stories that get in there are based on anecdotal evidence, individual opinion, and so forth. That's not something we would really want to rely on. And the point being that individuals and dealing with individuals, sometimes we take someone that has a strong reliance on, Channel 2 News, because mom and dad watched Channel 2 News, and before them, grandma and grandpa watched Walter Cronkite on Channel 2 News, and so it must be so. And it's very hard to deal with an individual that has formed, I'm going to say, above and beyond just considered or somewhat considered opinions, beliefs. Because if it's a thought, a process, an opinion, we can likely influence that. If it's a hard-driven, planted belief, not much we can do with that. If somebody really believes, is what it is. An errant belief. And so we're dealing with individuals, all kinds of individuals that don't see the world the way you and I do. that maybe don't see the world the way I do, but see the world the way you do. Hence, a philosophy, yes, a worldview, and so forth. Some beliefs that we form that become very individualized. And no, we don't all have groupthink. There are plenty of folks that do. You see that on the news almost every, the extremes, whether it's gun control, pro this, anti that, there are plenty of no shortage of issues, and so forth. But, this is what everybody, really? You mean there's not one person that doesn't believe that way? So individualized consideration, recognizing all of this stuff, and on top of that, adding cultural differences, arguably to include religious differences, economic differences, et cetera, the environmental stuff. And it clearly indicates that we are individuals. We are individuals. And this, dare I use the word, diverse perspective from individuals that don't all believe the same thing is valuable in terms of learning, because the awareness that I hope we get, especially as leaders, is that we're not just leading a mob. The military is one thing. You've got a bunch of people that have raised their right hand and swore an oath and all this. So, when the in quotes leader says, all right, take that hill, we're not going to sit there and argue with, 150 individuals, do this, it's yes or no, sir, and you go do what you got to do. But I'm talking about other than that. So we'll speak a little bit more on that. All right. So 4 other types of leaders are less effective than transformational, certainly Hodgetts' perspective. And these are some of the things, remember we started to read and look at those PowerPoints on contingency theory, contingent reward leader, active management by exception leaders, passive management by exception leaders, and this laissez-faire. I have to say that in my more recent experience, pardon me, because I haven't fired that many people in my lifetime. Very, very few actually. I've hired a whole bunch of people. But my leadership style is a little bit more, and see, I view it more positively than this. Let's go down to the bottom here first, laissez-faire leader. And it says here, avoids intervening or accepting responsibility for follower actions. Well, I disagree with that. My definition of a laissez-faire leader is that I hired you, because I'm impressed with your credentials, I'm impressed with your attitude, your approach, et cetera, et cetera. I hired you for all your skills and abilities. And so my laissez-faire approach is to say, hey, look, we have a challenge, we have a problem, we have an issue, that you need to deal with. You may do it differently than we just got done saying. Not everybody's the same. But I trust in all your skillfulness. That's why I hired you. So I am going to be hands off and let you solve the issue. That's my view of laissez-faire. Only the big difference is this. In doing that, I can never come back to you. It says here, avoids, this kind of leader avoids intervening or accepting responsibility for follower actions. Absolutely not. I absolutely have to accept the responsibility if you get it wrong. Why? Because I tasked you to do it. I put the ball in your court, and I can never come back to you and say, oh, it's your fault, you blew it, this, that, and the other thing. Because you'll never trust me again, and you will never take a chance again. Well, that relationship is ruined. I have to back up my people. I task you to fix this, solve this. And yes, I'm sure I'd do it differently, or at least a little differently. But do I want to micromanage and control? No. No, I hired you. You're smart, you're charismatic, you're, all these great things. You've got the position. I'm tasking you to do it. I hope you don't blow it. I hope you get it right. I hope you solve the issue. But if you don't, I can't turn around and you did this. You know, can't do that. That's my interpretation of laissez-faire, not what Hodgetts seems to. And not to put too fine a point on it, I'm right. Okay, so other things here, contingent reward clarifies what needs to be done, provides psychic and material rewards to those compliant. Well, you can read this stuff for yourself. I'm not going to read every slide. We're getting through this, but a bit more slowly than I'd like. And again, the optimal profile, you've got, this 4-quadrant matrix here, so you can go through that. I'm certainly not going to read the small print here, but qualities most demanded in advertisements for European executives. Well, it's pretty interesting. The idea, and let's just play with, one. Let's look at this ability to cooperate. In other words, this interpersonal skill set. Okay, so Sweden, okay, the most, 25. Denmark, 42. Norway, 32. Germany, 16. So in other words, the ability to cooperate. That's more important in some areas than others. And you can go down the list, results orientation, ability to motivate, blah, 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 blah. But that's interesting. Same thing here, again, ability to cooperate. Look at Great Britain, very low. Spain is about an 18, Italy. So Europe and, the island, Great Britain seem different. And we could do that and go through, China, the US, Canada, so on and so forth. But anyway, okay. Recent findings and insights about leaderships. Well, Anglo managers identify performance orientation and inspirational style, having vision, being a team integrator, blah, 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 top 5 attributes. Nordic managers rank these same 5 attributes as most important, but in a slightly different order. And it goes on to other things. Substantial differences exist between Southeast European countries, countries from Eastern Europe, in other words, pre-perestroika USSR driven or satellite nation states, Russia and Georgia, so on and so forth. So, you can go through some of this stuff and it's fairly, interesting. One of the keys to successful, if I could say that word, global leadership is knowing what style or behavior works best. And, there are plenty of stupid things and plenty of cues that come easily. Many years ago when I was doing the engineering stuff, factory automation, robotics and everything, I was, wearing a very expensive 3-piece suit and tie and driving either an Eldorado or a Benz at the time and all this. That's the way it was here in the East Coast, New York, surrounding areas, New England, and so forth. And I remember the very first trip, and this would have been, well, I'm not going to tell you the year, but a lot of years ago. You guys weren't born. Very first trip out to California. And so I got off the plane, LAX, and I got met, security was different then. So, just coming out from the gates and so forth. And I got met by an individual and, shook hands and all that. And he said, I knew it was you. And I said, well, how'd you know it was me? He said, well, because I know you're from New York. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, well, and you'll have to, do something before we go into these meetings, but you're wearing a 3-piece suit, a tie, blah, blah, blah. He says, out here, he said, it's a polo shirt and a pair of, whatever, crease pants, but I mean, not these, very expensive suits. So I ditched the tie, ditched the vest, ditched the jacket, and just did open collar. And the following day, I showed up in a polo shirt. Greater awareness came when I would travel to some South American countries doing business. And we would agree, I'd show up, check into the hotel, and, we'd have dinner, a bunch of drinks, and all of this. Okay, let's meet tomorrow morning for breakfast. 8 o'clock? Yeah, 8 o'clock. So 8 o'clock, I'm downstairs, ready to go, at the breakfast table, and I'm waiting. It's 8:30. It's 9, and it's 9:30. At about quarter to 10, a couple of the individuals would show up. Now, by now, my New York, my veins are popping. I can't really show them, but I mean, I'm on fire. We said 8 o'clock, and I've been sitting here with my thumb in the air for, the last couple of hours. And to them, it's that, and again, it's not right, wrong, good or bad. It's just different. But it was that almost, manana mentality. In other words, yeah, okay, 8 o'clock. Yeah, well, so we get there, by around 9:30 or 10. We're still good. We'll have some breakfast and we'll go do a much more relaxed environment. And the only pressure came from, you got it, yours truly. Because A, I didn't understand the culture. B, I didn't care to understand the culture because why? My way was the right way. Well, things don't really always work that way. Point being that, there are some cultures, and here it's referred to as effective cultures, where leaders tend to exhibit their emotions. They tend to accept their way of doing things as being 100% correct, and everybody should follow and do as I do. And then there are, what Hodgetts refers to as neutral cultures, where we're not quite as emotional. We're oftentimes more accepting of other individuals and so forth, whether that's our way or not. And of course, this gets a little deeper than that. So you'll do some reading in that regard, effective and neutral cultures. So, we're getting to the point, this charismatic value-based leadership captures the ability of leaders to inspire, motivate, and encourage high performance outcomes. You notice it's all, in a sense, passive stuff. Things like encourage, not demand. Inspire, not insist. Motivate. You get the idea. So it's, to borrow from McGregor, it's certainly more theory Y than theory X. And if I can inspire you, if I can get you to buy off and accept and believe and take ownership of the mission and vision and what we're trying to accomplish, well, that's a home run. And that's how we create this charismatic relationship between ourselves. And again, you'll read some more on that. I'm going to drop this idea of team-oriented leadership for right now. If you've taken other courses with me, then we've talked, about Hofstede, Kurt Hofstede and his 5 cultural dimensions. Yes, I know the most recent that you Google has a 6th, dimension that he's added, which, doesn't really pertain to what we're talking about in my view. But anyway, whichever. So you look at, Hofstede, and, some cultures value this idea of collectivism, teams, if you will. Some cultures value more highly individualism. So I've mentioned before that here domestically, we reward the biggest vote getter. We reward the fastest runner, the tallest jumper. We reward Steph Curry, who can make 3-point shots all day. I mean, that guy has just got talent, out the ear. He's just extraordinary. And whomever else you may believe. In other cultures, that would be frowned upon because he's not part of the group. He's not part of the collective. He's not part of the team. And that's what we value. If the team wins, we all win. That's not how we reward domestically. So this idea of team orientation is a little bit more controversial than it may seem because it directly invites the cultural argument. And most arguments at some point degenerate into good, bad, right, or wrong, which is why I say I try very hard in our groups to avoid normatizing. We want to analyze, not normatize. Analyze, not normatize. Normatize, of course, you understand to me. Overlay your own sense of right, wrong, good, bad, and all of this stuff. We don't want to do that. We want to analyze. We want to understand using analytical ways, analytical means, and see how best to incorporate that or use that or not use that, to be frank. But the idea of normatizing, well, they like more of a collective approach. That's bad. Really, it's not that simple. So again, we're kind of winding down to where I want to go. I think maybe this will be the last one or two slides I'll talk about with this participative leadership. I have a discussion that I frequently have here at the university, and I refer to it as a green chairs argument. And I may have said this to you earlier. I'm getting old and senile, so I don't remember exactly. But when the School of Business took the space down here, we were brought down on a couple of buses. Some of us, drove down, and we were shown by the administration the facilities here. And at the time, this was just empty space. I mean, there were some concrete columns. There were wires hanging down everywhere. There was dirt everywhere. It was a completely unfinished, facility. Old, probably warehouse or whatever the hell this thing was in another life. And Dr. McSherry, the dean, who's absolutely brilliant, has vision to spare, believe me, brought us around, and he said, well, I envision that there's going to be this huge, entryway here. We'll have some elevators. We'll have this big staircase. And they had to cut the floor above to create this big open space. And then when we went upstairs, he said, I envision this as being kind of like Broadway. It's going to go from the front of the building all the way to the end and off to the sides. There'll be classrooms, there'll be this, there'll be that, and so forth. So I guess a year later, perhaps a bit longer than that, we were invited back when the facility was done. And it was kind of like, okay, well, here's what we did with it. What do you think? One of those kind of things. And so we walked around and looked, and different people had different thoughts. And yeah, I love all the glass, and I love the modern technology, and I love all of that. And not Bernie, but one of the other individuals, one of the chairs, came up to me and said, so what do you think of the classrooms? And I said, well, why do you ask? He says, well, I'm just curious what you think. And I said, I said, it's a green chairs argument. He looked at me and says, green chairs argument? What the hell is that? I said, well, the chairs in the classroom, they're this, I don't know if it's a Kelly green, I don't know, whatever color green it is. And I said, that's not my personal favorite, to be honest. And I said, so if I don't like the chairs, you're showing me everything, and I like the glass and the technology and all, but if I don't like the chairs, you're going to replace them? He looked at me and he said, well, no. I said, well, then why the hell would you ask what I think about it? You've already made the decision. You already bought the damn chairs. They're already in the classrooms. So from that point forward, I would use this in different discussions, especially where a decision had already been made and implemented. And somebody comes up and says, well, what do you think about this? It doesn't matter what I think, because you've already pulled the trigger and made the decision. If I tell you, look, this sucks, are you going to change? And the answer is, of course not. Green chairs argument. So here's my point. Participative leadership requires a certain genuineness. Don't ask somebody what they think about something after the decision is made, because you don't really care what they think. And everyone can spot a phony. So don't do this green chairs argument garbage with me. If you want to know what I think, you'll ask me before. If you're just kind of pandering or trying to get feedback as to, how resistant I am, or am I going to talk about this behind your back or something? Yeah, then you've made all the decisions. Then you're going to ask me, well, what do you think? Well, you know what? I think it sucks. What are you going to do about it? And the answer we all know is nothing. So anyway, this idea of participative leadership, excuse me, the extent to which leaders involve others in decisions and implementation. The key is the implementation part. Don't make a decision, implement it, and then say, oh, what do you think about this? Because you don't really care. And again, that's phony, and everybody understands that. Humane-oriented leadership is not too dissimilar. It comprises this idea of supportive and considerate leadership, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And so I think I'm going to stop there. We're, just about at that 60th slide, so you can go through this stuff. And we're going to talk about ethics in the context of moral saints and heroes. I'm not going to bring that up to you here, but we will discuss some of that stuff going forward. So I'm going to stop share. And I hope the audio on this is better than the previous day where I was just using whatever they had set up here in the office. I hope this microphone, it says it's noise canceling and all this baloney. So, I hope it's a little bit better. With that, I'm going to stop this, and I will try and post it today or tomorrow. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll chat again soon.